Speaker is Professor Dr. Fikret Karaman. Currently, he's the Dean of the Faculty of Theology of İnönü University. He used to work in different departments and at different levels in our presidency. Mr. Chair, dear colleagues who are taking part in the same session, and dear audience, please accept my best regards before I start. Well, before I start delivering my speech in this international Hajj Symposium, I would like to thank all the organizers, the presidency, the DG for Hajj and Umrah, and all the staff. I would like to congratulate you. As it has been mentioned by the chair now, I worked in the organization, Directorate General, both in the headquarters, abroad, and also in the local offices in Turkey. I can really feel the spiritual excitement. I also feel the responsibility. So when I was preparing my paper, I didn't give a list of references because my reference was 35 years of my experience. So that paper is written by me based on my long years of experience. I don't want to lose much time, but let me say one more thing. It's a reminder to my young colleagues. So officially and institutionally, the Hajj organization in Turkey started in 1979 to be practiced by the Presidency of Religious Affairs. It was a trial, and then gradually travel agencies of category A were included in the process, and now the Presidency of Religious Affairs of Turkey, in fact, is in charge of the Hajj organization. Of course, it is at the disposal of the President. Both in Turkey and abroad, the general responsibility rests with the President, and a high percentage of the organization is taking place under our control together with the category A travel agencies. In fact, we can say that the presidency has almost half a century long experience in this regard. So intentionally, I would like to focus on the communication language because about education, many things have been said so far, especially the first speaker, Mr. Director, gave very important highlights. There are some common points between his remarks and my paper. I'm not going to repeat them. And also the previous speaker, the professor, also talked about the spiritual and immaterial dimension of this phenomenon. That is why now I would like to focus on the language of communication in Hajj organization. If you are working with full capacity, I mean 80,000 or 90,000 pilgrims, about 5,000 staff members, officers are also there. They are both from our presidency and Ministry of Health. So these are people from different levels of our hierarchy. For example, they are in charge of the order of caravans, and there are leaders of caravans. There are other team members working in different teams. I'm giving this list to you because sometimes even between these task groups, you can see some discussions, quarrels. Sometimes they are offended. Sometimes they break one another's heart. And this is not the end of the story. Sometimes between our officers and pilgrims damage their relations. Sometimes it's happening at the very early times of the journey. sometimes it's happening because of some slips of tongue, and one officer may really offend some group of pilgrims or one caravan altogether. Sometimes from one group, one caravan, a group of pilgrims is coming to us and asking for their caravan leader to be replaced, asking for their religious officer to be replaced. Sometimes they're coming to complain about some victimization that they suffered from. That is the situation very briefly. As it has just been mentioned, social, cultural, and religious aspects are there in this Hajj organization, and this is an international organization. So there is a regional dimension, and there is also a socio-cultural dimension, and there are some diplomatic features of this activity. This is an international activity, and Hajj Ibadah, as it was emphasized by their colleagues, is about guidance, information, friendship, health, transportation, safety, accommodation, and sustenance. You see, there are many dimensions of this organization. So the travel agencies of category A argue that Hajj is a touristic trip or travel. Yes, it is a contribution to tourism, but Hajj is not touristic. Some rules of tourism need to be implemented in Hajj organization. That is true. But Hajj Ibadah is not merely some touristic activity. If you think in this way, you can be really faulty. As it has been mentioned before, the local training is okay because the citizens can understand one another, they share a common culture, tradition, customs, but after a while, the pilgrim candidates will arrive in Saudi Arabia territory. They will see people from different races, different languages. They will see different behavioral patterns. And that is why the pilgrims should be prepared for this encounter. Regarding the language of communication, there are a few highlights that I need to make. In this travel, there are some public personnel members as well, not only the personnel of the Presidency of Religious Affairs, but managers of all levels, politicians, businessmen, members of the press, artisans, professionals, and also people of lifetime experience. They're also going on Hajj. So when a religious officer of ours or when a leader of a caravan, when they are addressing the groups, they need to be careful. They're not always the villagers, sometimes they are press members, sometimes an authority, sometimes a DG, so you can never know. The way of communication, the way of addressing those people should be polite, and the behavior and attitude should be kind. Let me explore this some more. The personnel should use a very polite and civilized language, a civil language, a civic language. So the language should be softer and teaching. The officers should have patience, should be tolerant, they should be careful with their style. So this is not a command and order chain. You said this is about mutual motivation. This is about mutual enthusiasm, and the style of the officers can cherish the motivation mutually. The personnel, when they are communicating among themselves, should be easily using the following words: Mr., Mrs., Professor, thank you, thanks a lot, great, congratulations, bravo. So these words should be used very generously among each other, because sometimes I see it is otherwise. And also, as I said, there are normally 5,000 public servants that are engaged in the organization services during the journey. And when they use a harsh style, you will offend people. Maybe you will not get a direct reaction, but you don't know what will happen later after the addressee or the product returns its back. So please bear in mind, everyone has a certain level, has a certain office, has a certain personal honor. Please respect others if you are an officer working in those journeys. And you see, preparedness starts with yourself. Preparedness starts with the personnel, and it starts with the language of communication. Believe me, it will yield better results. One more thing for the pilgrims. The pilgrims, in fact, as you had before, in fact, are adults. When you look at the profile, the age profile, probably the age range is somewhere between 50 and 60. So think about the human profile at the age of 50 to 60. Think about this profile. When you are addressing those people, try to use the proper words, just like Mr., Mrs., lady, gentleman. I'm sorry, thank you. Have a nice morning. Have a nice evening. Have a nice day. In fact, these are, very usual words that we always use. But in Hajj journey, these are even more important because, yes, you are trying to train your pilgrims, but you are also you may also give more. Let's look from the negative perspective. Suppose that a staff member is reprimanding a pilgrim. Suppose that he is treating the pilgrim just like his inferior staff member. During this journey, then you will offend that pilgrim. In fact, that pilgrim will no more come to that officer to ask any questions, and that friendly dialogue will be harmed as well. So Hajj journey is there in order to enrich our emotional world, but very small adversity may block this way of enrichment. So in the training program, we should have some space for the communication language. Another topic is related to indal mekan, indal hajj. It means depending on the time and need, information should be provided. This is not training, as is. For the first time, in fact, we paid attention to the time and space of pre-training. And you can find the relevant information in my paper. And you also heard it from Mr. Director General. So there are different phases of training. Pre-trip, Mecca, Medina, more elements. Arafat training, Tawaf and Sa'i, detailed training. I think you should be time-bound and space-bound to the possible extent. So in Turkey, you can provide some information about Sa'i. You can use visuals. You can explain Müzdelife, Mina, Arafat. Of course, you need to do it. But after arrival at the Holy Lands, explaining everything on the side will make all this information permanent. All this information will be easily comprehensible by the pilgrim. So please be careful with the timing and the space of information. I'm not sure, am I frozen? Can you hear me, Mr. Chair? Yes, okay. Well, that is something we sometimes miss. Think about the profile of pilgrims. Some of them stay in the Holy Lands for 12 days, some 20 days, and some spend 30 to 40 days in the Holy Lands. So take into consideration this when you are designing your training programs. Do proper classification. If the pilgrim who's going to stay 12 days and 40 days will need different information. And now some technical elements. Yes, dear Professor, you have about 3 minutes. Please wrap up in 3 minutes. Well, okay, of course, there are many things to say, but I cannot exploit my limits, I know. As you have just heard from the previous speaker, Mr. Emin Ay, in fact, our presidency has very successful works and initiatives in this regard. Since the beginning of this process, many staff members put a lot of efforts, but we mostly focused on the fiqh, catechism, and the Hajj as an ibadah. That's okay, there is nothing wrong with this. But what about the human relations, language, style, stylistics, getting settled? And you need to give more weight to these elements. Since I spent some years in the presidency, I know that the colleagues who went to Hajj for 5 times or 10 times, you know, maybe not everyone, but sometimes they get too much. You know, it turns into habits. They smoke with the pilgrims, and for example, when there is the Azan, they cannot go to the Haramain with the pilgrim, and that is becoming too obvious for the pilgrim, and that can create some negative image against the presidency. So people who are going to work with the caravans and the groups should be very careful with their behavior. Every year, at least we can prepare some small booklets, easy to carry with you, you know, maybe 40, just 50 pages. And, you know, training should have different parts. And at the correct time and place, different chapters should be instructed. For the Muslims in Bulgaria, I worked in the Religious Affairs Advisory Office. I prepared a practitioner training guide. After their return, some pilgrims told me, gave me feedback. They said that, dear professor, your practical guide was enough to make us some pilgrim, because we knew what to do at the airport, how to behave in the aircraft, how to claim our baggage, and what to do in Mecca, Medina, Arafat. So that booklet you prepared was our guide during our pilgrimage. That was their feedback. Now, I'm concluding. Well, Hajj is really complicated, but it is also very exciting. It's enjoyable. It changes your material and spiritual life. It is very powerful. It has the power of change. So our presidency has been working very enthusiastically, will continue to do so, and will bring some innovation, may bring some innovation to this training topic, and it can make better use of that spiritual and social potential material. So Hajj is important, and the pilgrims returning to their hometowns are also important. They should keep in contact with our Mufti offices. They can continue our dialogue with presidency. That dialogue should be maintained in a strong manner. That is also essential. Once again, I would like to thank the organizers. When I am concluding my remarks, I would like to congratulate all the colleagues and all the co-workers, and I wish you success in this session. That's all. Before you give me the second warning, Chair, I am concluding. Thank you, Professor Dr. Fikret Karaman.